In this video, we will take a closer look at how you can use the data or the attributes of one graph to update another one. On this page, we have on the left side a line chart that displays the amount of students working on one framework. And right, we have the amount of female and male students working on each of these framework. So we update the value of the graph right with the data of the graph left. As you can see, anytime we hover on one point of the left graph, the right graph updates. So let us have a look at how our code is looking like. So in this example, we use the attribute over data of the graph left. First, we define our two graphs, the line chart and the bar chart. The line chart was declared here in this part of the code with a reusable component that we first define below. This reusable component takes as parameter an ID, the graph data, the graph title, and the hover data. This is very important because in our second graph, we are using the hover data to render the data. And as our page renders, it will always need a data to start with so that it can show a graph. So we have to give our first graph a default hover data. Here we define this hover data below, and it is defined in the variable get hover data right here. So we define that when our page renders the first time, the data that it's hovered is React, also the framework React. So we have on the right side the amount of female and male students that works on React. So then we also define the second graph, which is a bar chart. But we don't put the data of this graph directly as we define it. Instead of that, we put the ID of this graph and its value figure in an app callback right here. So how is our app callback defined? In the input of our app callback, in the app callback decorator, we put the ID of our first graph. You can see here, this is the ID we give our first graph, and this is the same ID that we put in the input. So we say that the input of our app callback is the first graph, and its value, it's the hover data. It means it's the hover data that we are using to update our output, which is the second graph, also the bar chart. This is what we specified on top. So we put the ID of the bar chart, which is bar graph, and its value, which is figure, in the output attributes of our app callback decorator. The next thing we do is define the content, or what should be done in our app callback function. It means the update of the bar graph. So here we define an array which is all the custom data of our hover data. All the custom data of our hover data are the different frameworks. It means React, MongoDB, Flask, and Dash. After that, we define the value that should be displayed on the x-axis of our bar chart, which is the framework name. Then we also define the data on the y-axis of our bar chart, which is first the amount of female students that are working on this particular framework. Since we want to display the amount of female and male, we have a second bar in our bar chart, and its values are on the x-axis, also the framework name, and on the y-axis the amount of male students that are working on this framework. Once these data are setted, we can return them by putting them in the attribute data. So this is what we are doing here by defining data and then putting this data we've defined first here, and so on in the attributes of data. It means for the first bar on our bar chart, this data here, we define x as the x-axis we've defined below, y as the y-axis we define below. Then we define the type, which is bar, and the name, which is female, since this is the bar that represents the amount of female students that are working on this framework. We do the same for the male students by defining the same attributes with different value. Then we also define the attribute layout and set the title of our bar chart. And that's it. We can now run our code and have the output that we seen before. It means this one. So basically, this is all you need to be able to have one graph that is updating with the data of the other graph. As you can see, here we have 30 students that are working on MongoDB, and from these 30 students, we have 8 female and 5 male. As for React, we have 11 students that are working on it and 7 female, 4 male. For Flask, we have 10 students that are working on this framework, 3 female and 7 male. As for Dash, we only have 4 female and no male students that is working on it. And that's it. You have your app with interactive visualization between two graphs.